Le Mistral was a small restaurant on a narrow stone street in Lyon, the kind of place people discovered once and then spoke of as if it were a secret. From the outside, it looked modest, with a dark blue awning and a chalkboard menu by the door. But past the swinging door to the kitchen, the air changed. Heat lived there, and noise, and a focused kind of joy. Steam climbed from pots. Pans crackled, knives tapped against cutting boards in a steady rhythm, undercut by shouts of "service" behind and chords. The smell of butter, garlic, wine, and searing meat wrapped around anyone who stepped inside. At the center of it stood Luc Moreau. He was 26, with dark hair pushed back from a face that looked a little too serious for his age. Tonight, his chef's jacket was especially crisp. The fabric still stiff from being newly embroidered. Luc Moreau sous-chef. When he had first seen his name stitched there, he had run his thumb over the letters, feeling pride and a small tremor of fear. Luc had worked his way up through the ranks at Le Mistral. He had started on salads, nervous and wide-eyed, then moved to the grill, then to fish. He had earned his scars the usual way, oil that jumped higher than expected, pans grabbed too quickly, long nights when his feet pulsed and his back ached. But he stayed anyway. The promotion felt like proof that all of it had meant something. At the far end of the counter, watching quietly, was Chef Bernard Lefebvre. Bernard was a man of calm lines and careful movement. His hair was cropped short and flecked with grey. His hands, though scarred, moved with an ease that came only from years at the stove. He had cooked in Lyon, Paris, Marseille, and had returned to this smaller restaurant because, as he liked to say, here, the food still matters more than the ego. When he looked at Luc, he saw talent, and beside it, the sharp edge of ambition. "Full house tonight," Bernard said, eyes on the reservation sheet. "We have a critic at 8:30. Table 6, well known, writes as if he is cutting into bone." Luc straightened. "We'll give him something good to cut into, chef." Bernard's mouth curved slightly. "Remember what I told you when you started on the line? There had been many instructions, but some had stayed." "Taste everything," Luc replied, "and don't wait too long to ask for help. The kitchen is a team," Bernard said. "Tonight isn't an exam. You pass by yourself." Luc nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. A critic, a full house, his first major service as sous-chef. He felt something tighten and expand in his chest at the same time. He wanted to prove that he belonged behind this stove, that he could stand in the center of the storm and not flinch. At 7 o'clock, the first guest walked into the dining room, and the printer on the kitchen wall woke up. The first ticket slid out with a mechanical purr. 2 salmon, 1 entrecôte, 1 duck. Table 3 called the expediter. Luc repeated it under his breath as he moved. Pan for the salmon, heat for the steak, a quick glance at the clock. His hands found the tools he needed without looking. At first, service moved like a practiced dance. Luc seared the salmon until the skin turned crisp, basted it with butter scented with thyme and garlic. The steak hit the pan with a hiss, building its dark crust. He checked the flame, counted the seconds, and slid plates onto the pass. Servers lifted them away, murmuring, "Merci, chef," as they vanished through the swinging door. More tickets came. 4 salmon, 3 entrecôtes, 2 duck, table 7 and 8 combined. 1 lamb, 1 steak, 1 vegetarian, table 2. The thin paper curled as it grew into a long ribbon above the pass. From the garnish station, Camille glanced at Luc. She was in her 30s, steady and unhurried. her station lined with trays of roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, green beans waiting for a last toss in butter. She had cooked beside Luke long enough to recognize the first signs of strain. "Hey, Luke," she called lightly. "If you need me to take a duck or two, just say it. I've got space." Luke didn't look up from the stove. "I'm fine," he replied, a little too quickly. "Just keep your sides hot." "Okay," Camille said, turning back to her board. She didn't push, but she watched. The tickets kept coming. Heat from the stoves wrapped around Luke like a heavy coat. Sweat gathered at the back of his neck, under his collar. There was no time to wipe it away. He moved faster, adding more pans to the burners, juggling times in his head. In the rush, small habits began to slip. Normally, Luke would lift a spoon to taste the sauce for the fish, checking its balance, adjusting salt and acidity. Tonight, he glanced at the pan, told himself he already knew how it tasted, and moved on. Normally, he would look left and right, tracking the other stations, calling out times so the plates would land together. Tonight, he kept his eyes mostly on his own burners, convinced that if he just worked harder, just pushed a little more, he could outrun the growing tide of orders. Bernard, from his post by the pass, saw the slight tremor in Luke's hand as he flipped a steak. He saw the way Luke's jaw clenched when another ticket printed. He saw one piece of salmon stay on the heat for a beat too long, the skin crossing the line from crisp to almost burnt. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Some lessons, he knew, could not be handed to a young chef like a recipe. They had to be discovered in the middle of the heat. By the time the critic arrived at table 6, Luke's world had shrunk to the space in front of him. 5 pans, 3 orders in his head, the constant chatter of the printer, and a single stubborn thought repeating like a drumbeat. "I can handle this. I don't need anyone's help." By 8 o'clock, the kitchen felt like a furnace with walls. The thin ribbon of tickets had become a curtain. Orders for salmon, entrecote, duck, lamb, all layered and overlapping. The servers moved faster. The expediter's voice sharpened, and the hum of the dining room outside became a dull roar behind the swing of the door. Luke planted his feet and tried to hold the center. 2 salmon, 1 duck, 1 steak. Table 6, 4 salmon, 3 steaks. Table 10, 3 lamb, 2 duck. Table 2 and 3 fire, now. He repeated the calls under his breath. Pans already hitting the burners. Oil shimmered. Butter foamed. He laid the fish down, added steaks, checked the oven. This was what he had trained for, he told himself. This was the proving ground. But the tighter he held on, the more things began to slip. The first sign came small. A salmon fillet stayed in the pan a few seconds past ideal. The skin moved from golden brown into a darker, bitter edge. Luke noticed, but there was no time, he told himself, to start over. He flipped it, added butter, tried to convince his eyes that it was just very crispy. He sent it to the pass. Minutes later, a server reappeared, hesitant. "Table 5 says the salmon skin is burned. They say the sauce is very strong." Luke felt his face heat. "The skin is supposed to be crisp," he replied tightly, "and the sauce is reduced. That's the flavor." The server nodded, but his eyes flickered away. He took the plate back without arguing. Bernard at the pass took in every detail. The almost burned skin, the over-reduced sauce, the tension in Luke's voice. He said nothing. He simply sent out a replacement, quietly adjusting it himself. The next crack came a few minutes later. "Chef?" Camille called. "Your steaks on the left own of them is still on the heat." Luke spun. 2 entrecôtes sat in the pan, one still safe, the other already beyond medium. He pulled them both and tried to tell himself the critic wouldn't notice a slightly more cooked piece. He plated, added sauce, slid them onto the pass. Camille watched his face. "Luke," she said gently, "let me take table 8's duck at least. You're on 4 tickets at once." He didn't look at her. I said, "I'm fine. Just keep up with the sides." "Okay," she answered quietly, but there was no ease in her voice now. The kitchen noise changed in tone. It was subtle, but everyone felt it. The light banter disappeared. The oui, chefs became shorter, clipped. The air grew heavier, every mistake adding an invisible weight. Luke's usual habit-swiping plates, tasting sauces, checking seasoning fell away under the rush. He moved in bigger gestures now. More salt here, more flame there, hoping speed would compensate for precision. Then came the order they had all been expecting. "Fire table 6, the expediter called. That's the critic." There was a small pause in the kitchen, barely a heartbeat, but it hung there. 2 salmon, 1 entrecôte, 1 duck. Table 6. "All right," Luke said, more to himself than anyone else. "We've got this." He reached for fresh pans, turned the heat to just the right level, or so he thought. He placed the salmon carefully, listening for the sound that told him the heat was neither too low nor too high. He laid the steak and watched the first side sear. For a moment, he found his earlier rhythm again. He spooned hot butter over the fish, checked the color on the meat, coordinated with Camille so the vegetables would be ready at the same time. But then another ticket printed, and another, and another. 2 more salmon, 3 steaks, 4 lamb. Fire now for table 10 and 12. The critic's table blurred into the rest. Luke started to hurry. He flipped the steak for table 6 a little early, distracted by the new orders. The duck for table 6 waited too long before hitting the pan. He felt the timings slipping like wet stones in his hands. Camille spoke up again. "Luke, I've got space. Let me do the duck for 6. You focus on the critic's steak and fish." He shook his head. "No, I'm responsible for mains. I'll handle it." "Luke, Camille, please," he snapped, louder than he intended. "Just do your station." The kitchen went quiet for half a second. The only sound was the hiss of the pans. Camille turned away, hurt and frustrated. Bernard watched both of them, his face unreadable. The plates for table 6 finally came together. The salmon, the duck, the steak, all arranged neatly, garnished, wiped, placed under the heat lamps. They looked fine. Not perfect, not the best Luke had ever done, but acceptable. Under the pressure of the moment, he convinced himself it would be enough. The servers carried them away. Luke barely had time to exhale before the next wave crashed over him. Orders piled, flames flared, and he pushed harder, driven by the same thought that had been echoing in his head all night. If I can just get through this service, they'll see I can do it. I can carry it. Then the door swung open again. A server entered, holding a single plate, the entrecôte for table 6. The steak sat in the center, sliced open. It was gray all the way through, with only a faint blush of pink near the center. The juices had already run out onto the plate and cooled. The server's voice was low. "Table 6 sent this back," he said. "The critic says it's overcooked and disappointing." That last word seemed to land with its own weight. The noise of the kitchen dimmed around Luke. The crackle of pans and the shouts of orders faded into the background. All he could see was the lifeless steak in front of him and the knowledge of who had eaten it or tried to. His chest tightened. Heat rushed up his neck. For a moment, his hands didn't know what to do. "I'll fix it," he said, grabbing another piece of meat. Slamming a pan onto the stove. "I'll redo it right now." He turned the flame up too high. The pan smoked almost instantly. "Luke," Camille began, "you're burning, I know what I'm doing," he snapped, his voice cracking. His world had narrowed to a single point. The idea that this one steak, this one plate, could erase the hours he had worked, the years he had climbed. The thought that the critic might walk away thinking he was careless, incompetent, unworthy, it cut deeper than any kitchen burn. He dropped the new steak into the pan. The oil spat angrily, stinging his wrist. He barely flinched. "Fire Table 6 remake," he shouted. And that was when Bernard finally moved. The head chef stepped down the line, not with the speed of panic, but with the steady pace of someone who understood that rushing was no longer the answer. He stopped beside Luke, looked at the smoking pan, the trembling hands, the curtain of tickets, the returned plate. "Luke," Bernard said quietly, but in a tone that carried through the noise, "step back." Luke shook his head, still gripping the handle of the pan. "Chef, please, I can fix it. Just let me." Bernard's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "Step back." The words settled over the station like a lid over a boiling pot. Luke's fingers loosened on the pan handle. For the first time that night, he let himself admit that nothing he did, moving at this speed, in this state, was going to fix what had already gone wrong. He stepped back, just half a pace, but it felt like a cliff's edge. Bernard reached for a small plain metal spoon sitting in the container by the stove. And the night began to change. Bernard lifted the small spoon as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He dipped it into the sauce that had been simmering beside Luke's station all night, the same sauce Luke had been ladling over steaks without once tasting. Bernard brought the spoon to his lips and closed his eyes for a brief moment. He winced. "Too salty," he said quietly. "Too reduced. It's bitter now." He turned his head slightly. "Did you taste this tonight, Luke?" Luke felt his throat tighten. The honest answer sat heavy in his chest. "No, chef," he admitted at last. I thought I knew it well enough." Bernard nodded, as if that confirmed what he already suspected. He said nothing sharp, nothing cruel. Instead, he moved along the line, spoon in hand, tasting the other saucisson for the duck, one for the lamb, a glaze resting at the back of the stove. Each time, he made small corrections. A splash of stock to loosen a sauce that had turned too thick. A squeeze of lemon to brighten something dull. A small bit of sugar to soften the harsh edge of a reduction. His movements were economical, his face calm. Then he turned back to Luke and held out the spoon. "Here," he said, "taste this now." Luke hesitated. The kitchen was still moving around them, Camille plating vegetables, the fry cook dropping potatoes, the servers waiting at the pass, but in that small circle of light. The spoon felt like the only thing in the room. He took it and let the sauce touch his tongue. It was different, balanced. The bitterness that had been there before was gone. There was depth and softness, salt and richness, but no single note shouted over the others. "I didn't realize," Luke said slowly. "I know," Bernard replied. "That's the problem." He reached past Luke, lowered the flame under one pan, tilted another so the meat would baste in its own juices. "You cooked tonight with your memory and your pride. Bernard went on, his voice still low, meant for Luke alone. Not with your senses and not with your team. Luke stared at the floor. I just wanted to show I could handle it, that I didn't need babysitting. Bernard's eyes softened. You wanted to show you were strong, and in doing so, you refused the very things that make a chef strong. He tapped the spoon lightly against Luke's knuckles. Checking, tasting, asking, sharing. Luke swallowed hard. I didn't want to look weak, chef. That's pride, Bernard replied. Pride says, if I ask for help, they will think less of me. Humility says, if I ask for help, we will do better together. Which one do you think the guests taste on the plate? The question landed more deeply than any criticism. For a moment, they simply stood there, the young chef, sweating and exhausted, and the older one, steady as a stone in the middle of the storm. Then, Bernard stepped back, but only half a pace. He didn't take over the station. He didn't push Luke aside. Now, he said, we finish the night together. You taste everything before you send it. You call when you're falling behind. You let Camille help you. Understood? Luke nodded. Yes, chef. Good. Bernard placed the spoon in his hand. Start with the sauce for table 10. Luke dipped the spoon, brought it to his lips, and for the first time that evening, really tasted. It was a habit he had once done almost automatically. Now it felt like an intentional act, a small bow of respect to the food, to the guest, to the craft. Too sharp, he murmured, needs softening. Then fix it, Bernard said, gently. Don't fight it, guide it. Luke added stock, whisked, tasted again. Better. He felt something loosen in his chest. He looked up at Camille. Can you take the duck for table 12? I'm catching up on the steaks. Camille met his eyes, surprised for half a second, then nodded with a small smile. Of course, just call me your hero later. The line shifted. A weight that had pressed down on everyone began to lift. The cooks started speaking again, calling times, checking plates, trading small jokes between orders. The rhythm returned, not perfect, but alive. Luke kept the spoon in his hand like an anchor. Before each plate left his station, he tasted. Sometimes he adjusted. Sometimes he left it as it was, but the decision came from awareness rather than assumption. The rest of service passed in a blur, but a different kind of blur. Not the blind rush of panic, but the tired, honest work of a team pulling together. When the last order was finally called, when the last plate left the pass, the kitchen sank slowly into silence. Pans were scrubbed, counters wiped, burners turned off one by one. The heat faded from the air, leaving only the soft clink of dishes and the distant murmur of the final guests lingering over dessert. Luke stood at his station, hands resting on the edge of the counter. The spoon, now streaked with sauces and tiny stains, lay beside him. Bernard walked over with a folded piece of paper. The front of house printed this for me, he said. The critic's first comments, sent to his editor. Luke's stomach clenched. Is it? Very bad? Bernard shrugged lightly. It is honest. He handed Luke the page. Luke unfolded it and read, Le Mistral wavered tonight. A misjudged steak, an overconfident sauce. But what interested me more was what followed, a quiet correction, a clear change in the plates that came after. There is a young hand in that kitchen that is still learning the difference between pride and care. I hope he keeps learning. There is something there worth waiting for. Luke read the paragraph twice. His face burned, but not entirely from shame. The critic had seen his mistake, but also his adjustment, his failure, but also his willingness, however late, to change. He lowered the paper. "I did this," he said softly, "all of it, the bad and the better." Bernard nodded. "Yes, that is how we grow, not by pretending we never fail, but by seeing what we do when we do." He picked up the spoon from the counter, wiped it with a clean towel, and pressed it into Luke's hand. "Keep this," he said, "not as a souvenir of tonight, but as a reminder. Any time you think you're too good to taste, too busy to ask, too proud to share, feel the weight of this spoon in your pocket." Luke closed his fingers around the simple piece of metal. It was so small, so ordinary, and yet he understood that dismissing it, this most basic tool, had nearly cost him the night. "Thank you, chef," he said quietly, "for not shouting." Bernard gave a faint smile. "Shouting fills the air. You were already full of noise. You needed space to hear yourself." He started to walk away, then paused. "Remember, Luke," he added, "it is not the complexity of a solution that saves us. Often, it's something very simple that we refuse to see." Later, after everyone had gone, Luke remained alone in the dim kitchen. He walked slowly along the line, touching the cooled pans, the silent burners, the empty pass. He slipped the spoon into the pocket of his jacket and pressed his hand over it. He thought of the burned salmon, the grey steak, the returned plate. He thought of the word disappointing. And then he thought of the second half of the critic's note, something worth waiting for. In the quiet, he understood what the night had given him. Not a perfect service, not the flawless victory he had imagined, but a clearer view of himself. He had seen how quickly the desire to prove his strength had blinded him to the smallest, simplest acts that keep a cook honest, tasting, asking, sharing the load. He had learned that sometimes the difference between ruin and recovery fits into the curve of a single spoon. As he turned off the last light and stepped out into the cool Lyon night, Luke felt the shape of the spoon in his pocket. He knew now that the real danger had not been in the heat of the stoves, but in the heat of his own pride. And he knew that from now on, before he served anything to a guest, to a critic, or to someone he loved, he would pause, take a breath, and make sure he could truly taste what he was about to give.